I am Bailey, 32 years old, a software developer from Chicago with a story that still feels surreal sometimes. What started as a perfect marriage to Sarah quickly unraveled into betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. My own parents chose her side, leaving me completely alone during the darkest period of my life. Fast forward 5 years, and I am now engaged to Zoe, an incredible pediatric nurse who helped me rebuild my life. Suddenly, my estranged parents want back in after discovering my engagement online. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button if you want to see how I handled family betrayal and found happiness again. Growing up in suburban Boston with Frank and Diane, my childhood was pretty standard American middle class. Dad worked as an accountant, mom taught elementary school, and we had the typical New England lifestyle with weekend trips to Cape Cod in summer and skiing in Vermont during winter. They raised me with traditional values about family loyalty and commitment, which makes what happened later all the more ironic. I met Sarah during my junior year at Boston University. We were both 21 and happened to be taking the same economics elective. She sat next to me on the first day, borrowed my textbook because hers had not arrived yet, and we just clicked. Sarah had these captivating blue eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was studying marketing, while I was deep into computer science, but we balanced each other perfectly. Our dating phase was everything you would expect from a college romance. Late-night study sessions, weekend road trips to Maine, and countless hours planning our future. After graduation, we both landed decent entry-level jobs in Boston and moved into a tiny apartment together. 2 years later, at 24, I proposed during a surprise trip to Acadia National Park. The sunrise at Cadillac Mountain seemed like the perfect backdrop for starting our life together. The wedding was small but beautiful. My parents immediately embraced Sarah as the daughter they never had. Mom and Sarah would spend weekends together shopping or trying new recipes while Dad took a genuine interest in her career ambitions. In many ways, they connected with her in ways they never quite did with me. I was happy about this at the time, believing their close relationship would only strengthen our family bonds. Our first few years of marriage were busy but fulfilling. I worked my way up at a software company while Sarah established herself at a marketing firm. We saved diligently and managed to buy a modest colonial-style house in a Boston suburb by our 4th anniversary. The house needed work, but we enjoyed the weekend projects together, turning it into our dream home one room at a time. We had talked about starting a family once we felt more established, and everything seemed to be falling into place according to our plans. Looking back, the first signs of trouble started in our 5th year of marriage. Sarah began working later, checking her phone more frequently, and seeming distracted during our conversations. There were sudden business trips that had not been mentioned until the last minute. When we were together, the intimacy that had always come naturally to us felt forced or absent entirely. I noticed these changes but convinced myself it was just work stress or perhaps the natural evolution of a relationship past the honeymoon phase. My parents continued their close relationship with Sarah during this time. They would often have lunch with her when she was near their neighborhood for work, something I encouraged despite my own increasingly busy schedule. Mom would call Sarah directly rather than going through me, which seemed perfectly normal then. Sarah would spend time at their house, even when I was traveling for work, helping Dad with his garden or organizing old family photos with Mom. I thought it showed how well she had integrated into our family. Then came the work conference in New York that changed everything. I was supposed to stay 3 days, but we wrapped up early. Wanting to surprise Sarah, I caught an afternoon train back to Boston without telling anyone. With flowers from her favorite florist and reservations at the new restaurant she had been wanting to try, I felt excited to reconnect after the distance I had been feeling. The house was quiet when I arrived, but Sarah's car was in the driveway, along with another vehicle I did not recognize. I still remember the distinct feeling in my stomach as I put my key in the lock. A sixth sense, perhaps, that something was fundamentally wrong. The sounds from upstairs confirmed my worst fears before I even reached our bedroom. The man scrambling to collect his clothes was James, a coworker from Sarah's marketing firm. I had met him at company parties, had even invited him to our house for dinner once. He mumbled apologies, while avoiding eye contact, then practically ran from the house, leaving Sarah and me to face what remained of our marriage. That first confrontation remains a blur of emotions. Sarah cried, said it had been a mistake, that she still loved me. But as the night wore on, and my questions became more specific, the truth emerged in painful fragments. This was not a one-time mistake. The affair had been going on for over a year. James was not some random temptation, but someone she had developed genuine feelings for. Most devastating of all, she had been contemplating leaving me for months, staying only because she worried about finances and how it would affect her relationship with my parents. I moved into a hotel that night, unable to sleep in our bed ever again. The next few days were a haze of calling in sick to work, ignoring concerned messages from friends, and trying to process what had happened to the life I thought we were building. Sarah alternated between tearful pleas for forgiveness and cold pragmatism about dividing assets. By the end of that week, when it became clear I could not simply forgive and continue, her attitude shifted completely. Sarah began a campaign that I could never have anticipated. She reached out to our mutual friends with a version of events that painted me as emotionally unavailable workaholic and potentially controlling. According to her narrative, she had been deeply unhappy for years, but afraid to leave. The affair became a symptom of our broken marriage rather than the cause. Friends I had known for years began to look at me differently, some openly questioning what I had done to drive her away. Through all this, I naturally turned to my parents for support. Their response still haunts me. Instead of the unconditional love and support I expected, I found hesitation and uncomfortable silence. When I finally broke down and told them everything, including the details of finding Sarah with James, my father sighed heavily before speaking. "James is not the real problem here, Bailey," he said. "Marriages do not just break overnight. You must have been neglecting her for things to reach this point." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Sarah has been telling us for months how lonely she feels. Did you really expect her to just wait forever while you focused on your career?" The revelation that Sarah had been confiding in my parents about our marital problems without my knowledge felt like a second betrayal. As the conversation continued, it became clear they had formed a narrative where I was primarily at fault. They suggested I needed to man up and fix my marriage rather than run away from the problems. They reminded me of their 40th anniversary, approaching how they had weathered their own storms and how divorce was a failure they never expected from their son. "Sarah has been like the daughter we never had," my mother said. "We cannot just turn our backs on her because you two are going through a rough patch." I left their house that day, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Over the following weeks, as the divorce proceedings began, I discovered more about how deep their betrayal went. Sarah continued to visit them regularly. They had been meeting her for lunch for months, while she complained about me forming a bond that apparently meant more to them than their relationship with their only child. They even advised her on how to approach the divorce to ensure she got a fair settlement. As the divorce progressed, Sarah turned increasingly vindictive. She wanted the house, a significant portion of my savings, and even items that had been in my family for generations. Her lawyer was aggressive, and I was too emotionally drained to fight as hard as I should have. When the settlement was finalized, I had lost almost everything. The house I had poured my weekends into improving, most of our savings, and even the respect of many friends who had chosen to believe her version of events. The final betrayal came when I lost the apartment I had been renting. The building was being converted to condos, and I needed temporary housing while searching for something affordable in Boston's expensive market. With nowhere else to turn, I called my parents to ask if I could stay in their guest room for a few weeks. "We have actually invited Sarah to stay with us while she renovates the master bathroom," my father said. "She is really struggling with the house maintenance on her own. I do not think it would be appropriate for both of you to be here." When I pointed out that Sarah had the house and financial resources while I was the one truly in need, my mother sighed. "She needs our support right now, Bailey. She does not have family of her own nearby, and this is all very difficult for her too. Maybe you could stay with a friend." I hung up the phone and sat in my half-packed apartment, surrounded by the few possessions I had managed to keep, and felt something break inside me. My own parents had chosen my cheating ex-wife over me. They had failed me when I needed them most. Not just emotionally, but in the most practical, fundamental ways that parents are supposed to support their children. That night was my lowest point. The apartment was almost empty, most items already in storage. I had found a tiny studio, an hour from my office, all I could afford after the divorce settlement. My new lease did not start for another week, and I literally had nowhere to go. I sat on the floor with a bottle of whiskey scrolling through my phone contacts, realizing there was not a single person I could call who would understand what I was going through. The depression that followed was severe. I moved into the studio apartment, which was little more than a room with a kitchenette and bathroom. The commute to work was draining, but I could barely afford the rent, even with my decent salary thanks to the alimony payments. I lost 20 pounds in a month, slept perhaps 3 hours a night, and my performance at work began to suffer. My boss, concerned about the dramatic change in me, suggested I take some time off, but I could not afford to miss a single paycheck. One night, standing on my small balcony looking down at the street 4 stories below, I found myself considering how easy it would be to make all the pain stop. The thought terrified me enough to step back inside and sit with my back against the wall, shaking. That was when my phone rang. It was Taylor, a friend from college I had not spoken to in years. He had noticed my absence from social media and reached out on a whim. That random call may have saved my life. Taylor listened to my story without judgment and then told me about a support group for divorced men that had helped his brother through a similar situation. I was skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything. The first meeting in the basement of a community center felt awkward and uncomfortable. But as I listened to other men share stories of betrayal, legal battles, and rebuilding their lives, something shifted. For the first time since finding Sarah with James, I did not feel completely alone. Through the group, I learned about a job opportunity in Chicago. A tech company was expanding their development team and offering relocation assistance. The idea of leaving Boston with all its painful memories and the constant reminder of my parents' betrayal became increasingly appealing. Within a month, I had interviewed, received an offer, and given notice at my current position. I called my parents to tell them I was moving. The conversation was brief and cold. They expressed surprise, but asked few questions about my new job or living situation. I realized they had grown accustomed to our distance, and perhaps preferred it that way. The day I drove out of Massachusetts, neither of them made the 30-minute drive to say goodbye. I left with nothing but what fit in my car and a determination to build something new from the ashes of my former life. Chicago welcomed me with anonymity and possibility. My new apartment was small but modern, in a building with young professionals who smiled in the elevator but asked few personal questions. The job challenged me in ways my previous position had not, forcing me to focus on learning new skills rather than dwelling on the past. For the first 6 months, I did little but work and sleep occasionally, joining colleagues for happy hour but sharing minimal personal information. Slowly, I began to establish routines that felt like stepping stones to a new identity. I joined a gym to regain the weight I had lost. I found a photography club that met on weekends, rediscovering a hobby I had abandoned during my marriage. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in divorce recovery, unpacking the complex trauma of both my failed marriage and parental rejection. Through mutual friends back in Boston, I occasionally heard updates about Sarah. She and James had moved in together within months of our divorce being finalized. My parents still saw them regularly, apparently embracing him as easily as they had once welcomed me. The news stung, but less sharply as time passed. I focused on my therapy mantra. I cannot control their actions, only my response to them. After a year in Chicago, I tentatively began dating again. The first few attempts were disasters, ending after 1 or 2 outings, when my trust issues became apparent. I continued working with my therapist, learning to recognize that not every woman was Sarah. Not every relationship was doomed to betrayal. Progress came in small increments in my ability to be vulnerable again, to share parts of my story without being consumed by anger or pain. Then came the volunteer program that changed everything. My company partnered with a children's hospital, offering employees paid time off to participate in various initiatives. I signed up to take portraits of sick children and their families, professional quality photos, to preserve memories during difficult times. During my orientation, I met Zoe. She was a pediatric nurse with curly auburn hair, green eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and a quiet competence that immediately impressed me. We worked together on my first day, Zoe helping nervous children pose and smile while I adjusted lighting and camera settings. Her patience and gentle humor created a safe space for families facing unimaginable challenges. We became friends, first meeting for coffee after my volunteer shifts. Zoe had her own history of heartbreak, a fiancé who left 6 months before their wedding. Her story was different from mine, but held the same themes of betrayal and rebuilding. Our shared experiences created a foundation of understanding that made it easier to be authentic with each other. Our first official date happened 3 months after we met. I took her to an obscure jazz club I had discovered, and we talked until the staff began stacking chairs around us. The relationship progressed slowly, both of us careful with our scarred hearts. I told her pieces of my story over time, including the painful rejection by my parents. Zoe never pushed for reconciliation or suggested I should forgive for my own sake responses I had grown to dread from others. Instead, she simply acknowledged my pain and respected the boundaries I had established. 2 years after meeting Zoe, we moved in together. Her apartment was larger in a neighborhood I had grown to love, with a spare room she converted into a home office for my photography side business. We created new holiday traditions to replace the family gatherings that had once defined my years. Thanksgiving became a Friendsgiving with colleagues who also couldn't travel home. Christmas involved volunteer work at the hospital, followed by a quiet celebration of our own. My career advanced steadily with a promotion to senior developer, bringing financial security I had not felt since before the divorce. Zoe and I built a circle of friends who knew our full stories and provided the chosen family neither of us had through blood relations. When I finally shared the complete story of my parents' betrayal with Zoe, including their attendance at Sarah and James' wedding, she held me as I cried for the relationship that would never be healed. 3 years into our relationship, during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan, I proposed to Zoe. The ring was simple but elegant, nothing like the one I had given Sarah. This proposal came from a place of healing rather than youthful optimism, with clear eyes about what commitment truly meant. Her tearful yes felt like the final piece of my rebuilt life falling into place. We announced our engagement on social media, not thinking about who might see it. 3 weeks later, an email arrived from my mother. The subject line simply read, "We miss you." The message itself was brief. They had seen the engagement photos. They were happy I had found someone. They had been thinking about me more and more lately. They happened to be planning a trip to Chicago next month and wondered if we might meet for coffee. They signed it "Love, Mom and Dad," as if the last 5 years of silence had been a brief misunderstanding. The email sent me spiraling. I showed it to Zoe, who held my hand as I cycled through anger, confusion, and a small, persistent hope I hated myself for feeling. We discussed it in my next therapy session, examining their motivations and my options for response. After careful consideration, I replied with a single sentence, "I am free on the 15th at 2 o'clock at the cafe on Michigan Avenue." The meeting itself was surreal. They looked older, of course. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and Mom had lost weight. They hugged me awkwardly, while Zoe stood protectively at my side. The conversation began with small talk about the weather, Chicago architecture, their hotel. Then came generic questions about my job and how Zoe and I had met. Not once did they acknowledge the years of silence or their role in my darkest days. Finally, Mom reached across the table and said what they had really come to say. "We would love to be part of the wedding, Bailey, and any future family you might have. We have been doing a lot of thinking, and family is so important. Life is too short for estrangement." The prepared speech I had rehearsed with my therapist dissolved in the face of their audacity. Instead, I simply asked, "Why now? Why not when I was sleeping on a friend's couch because you chose Sarah over me? Why not when I moved across the country alone? Why not on any of the birthdays or Christmases you never called their answers?" Revealed everything. They had maintained a relationship with Sarah and James until about a year ago, when Sarah announced they were moving to California for her new executive position. The couple they had chosen over their own son had essentially abandoned them once their usefulness ended. Now, hearing about my engagement and seeing photos of my successful life in Chicago, they wanted to reclaim their parental role without acknowledging the damage they had caused. I stood up Zoe's hand firmly in mine and delivered the boundaries I had decided upon. I would allow them limited contact supervised visits that would gradually increase if they demonstrated genuine remorse and respect for my new life. There would be no traditional parental roles in our wedding. They would need to acknowledge specifically and completely how their actions had hurt me, and they would need to understand that my forgiveness, if it ever came, would not erase the consequences of their choices. Dad started to protest to justify their past actions, but Mom placed a hand on his arm. I think for the first time they saw me, not as their disappointing son who had somehow failed at marriage, but as a man who had survived their rejection and built something beautiful without them. They nodded, subdued by the realization of what they had lost. Zoe and I were married 6 months later, in a beautiful ceremony overlooking Lake Michigan. My former support group leader served as best man. Zoe's large, loving family filled most of the seats on both sides of the aisle. My parents attended as regular guests, not walking me down the aisle or sitting in reserved front row seats. They brought an expensive gift we accepted with polite thanks. They danced at our reception and made appropriate small talk with Zoe's relatives. To anyone who did not know our history, they appeared to be normal parents of the groom. I no longer need their approval or love to feel whole. The family Zoe and I are building together, along with the friends who stood by me through my darkest times, provide all the connection and support I need. I have learned that forgiveness is possible without forgetting that boundaries can be more loving than blind acceptance, and that family is ultimately defined by actions rather than blood. Today, 1 year into our marriage, Zoe and I have purchased our first home together. We are expecting our first child, a girl, in spring. My parents receive monthly updates and have had 2 supervised visits. The relationship remains carefully structured, a pale shadow of what it could have been, but civil enough. I have found peace, not through perfect resolution, but through self-respect and the knowledge that I deserve better than what they offered during my time of greatest need. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family who hurt you deeply? Would you have given my parents a second chance or kept them out of your life entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories of healing after betrayal. Share with someone who might need to hear that it is possible to rebuild after losing everything. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we are born into.